Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited for you to be here. It's great that you agreed to join us and talk about your profession and the work that you do. In a minute, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and give the background, your wonderful story. We'll connect that to human services. So go ahead and let people know who you are, a little bit of what you do, any of, your personal story you'd like to share. And then, yeah.
Hey there, I'm Brenda Uekert. I have a Ph.D. in sociology. I'm a financial coach, speaker, and a full-time RVer. I've been traveling the country since May 2020, just sort of settling down a bit in California now. I spent decades working on justice system reform, in particular elder abuse and elder exploitation and adult guardianships. I worked on court reform issues, burned out, and I thought, you know what? I don't want to go back into this profession. I want to do something different. And I'm living in a day and age where if I have the internet, I can work from anywhere. So I switched to learn how to be a financial coach because to me, when you're burned out, when you lose your job, when you're ready to make a switch, it makes all the difference in the world if you got money or you don't have money. Either I'm working at McDonald's or I'm out goofing off. I prefer the goofing off part. So my goal has been to teach people how to reach financial freedom because it's really a simple formula and how to manage burnout, and which is very high in social services, human services profession. So that's kind of like the short part of my life. I've been traveling and have been witness to some of the most magical places in North America.
I'm curious, from all the people that you've come across, do you happen to run into any, I guess, human service professionals or social workers? I mean, there's not a lot of traveling gigs in the realm of human services.
You're right, a lot of travel nurses, a lot of IT folks. So I would guess if you can combine the human services with IT, you're going to have more freedom. And I do, though, see people like me who sort of left the workforce early. So maybe they were in human services and they're like, I just can't do this anymore. And they've left and maybe created second careers like I have. I threw out so much stuff and I gave away so much stuff when I left my house, and I don't ever want to go back. I don't want all that stuff. It's a distraction. Now, I've got a 32-foot rig, cabinet space. If I buy something, I have to get rid of something. I have to be very conscious of the choices I make, and I am delighted to be in this tiny little home. And so that is one of the things that folks can do at human services. Maybe the income's not so great, but you can actually live in RVs. You can go small, and that helps you get to the end point so much faster.
Right. I'm sure there's research out there that really reflects the living or the cost of living for human service professionals, give or take, is probably on the lower end, or at least the people that are successful at the 5 cars, 4 kids kind of thing. I don't know if a lot of professionals kind of would reflect that lifestyle, minus those who have very niche, high up kind of positions, maybe like government roles or such.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's kind of a perk in being in human services because you see how people are living. You're there to guide, to help, to navigate, to make a better system, a better world. Your values are probably not the values that say, well, I need a multi-million-dollar house on the Pacific coast overlooking Catalina Island,
Yeah.
So it's like, in a way, when your expectations are like, hey, I want to be in a cabin in the woods. I want to have my own place. I want to have flexibility. I want to have time to do my art. I want to volunteer. I want to do these other things. Once you're clear on those types of things, you can realize that, maybe it's not a big price tag. Maybe I can get to that point. The more you spend, the more you got to make, right?
Amen.
Yeah, yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's jump back a little bit. I would like you to share, the longer version of the story that you have, your personal story, from getting your PhD in sociology to burnout to your experiences with poverty. So wherever you'd like to start, the floor is
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. Well, for your audience, burnout. I mean, let's talk about burnout because um I only saw burnout after the fact, after I had this great career, and it's just I hit a point where it's like this isn't worth it anymore, and I threw that career away. I didn't know at the moment that I was burned out, and that's the tricky thing about burnout. You don't really know that you're burned out because you've normalized the workload. You've normalized the way that the office runs. It's just part of everyday life. And it isn't until after you leave, after something happens, that you look back and you're like, man, I was so burned out. And the thing that people don't understand about burnout, a lot of times they treat it like a personal issue, like, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I couldn't hack it, you know. It is not about the person. It is about the person and the workplace. What is that relationship like? So, that when I talk about burnout, I've got a speech and I use road trip analogies because I mean, I talk about like the risks because when we think about are the risks, most of us think about, well, you know what? I can't let people down. I got to get this project done. I got to be on top of my game. Maybe there's a risk of I don't want to lose my job when the next government shutdown comes and it's decided that we have to cut by 30%, We've got all of these worries. And so we worry about the job and we worry about the stability. And I use an example of when I was hiking in Texas. I was at Caprock Canyon State Park, Panhandle of Texas, and I hate rattlesnakes, right? So I'm hiking, I'm looking down the ground because I'm scared to death of rattlesnakes. That to me is the biggest risk. And I see motion up ahead on the trail. It's a bison. There's a bison hiding behind a bush. And that bison came out, stared me down, and I'm not well versed in bison etiquette. What do I do? So I froze, and that bison charged me. Now, obviously, I escaped, but that charging bison reminded me it was like, this is what burnout is like. I was so focused on the rattlesnakes that I didn't see this thing charging, coming after me until it was almost too late. That other thing is our health. It is our mental health. It is our physical health. Burnout takes a huge toll on us, and we're worried about the wrong things. We're worried about getting the job done and, oh, I can't take too many days off or this will look bad. What we really need to be concerned about is that bison that's going to stare us down, and that is our health. So that is when people talk about burnout, it is about the relationship between the person and the work, and it's not just about the workload. So, in studies, they've got 6 different factors: your workload, the amount of control or autonomy you have over work, and we were just talking about our need for flexibility. Rewards is a third piece. The fourth is the work community. How do you get along with the people? Do you like working with the people you're working with? The fifth one is fairness and justice. And then finally, it's about values. Do your values match the organization's values? And I can tell you, for me, it wasn't the workload that tipped me over. It was the third piece of rewards. And we think of rewards as, oh, income. I made decent money. I made good money. It wasn't about the salary. It was about the lack of gratitude, the lack of appreciation. I Somebody could have just said, you know what? I know you're putting in long hours. You've done all this incredible things for our organization. I really appreciate what it is that you're doing. That was the type of message I never heard from my organization. Instead, it was always more. You know, there's a, fill out, do another application for a grant. So I would apply for a grant, I'd get the grant, and then I was my only staff. So it's like, okay, I've done this, give me the staff. Well, we really can't. And so you get used to this, but it's the lack of rewards, the lack of appreciation, the lack of recognition, the lack of understanding how valuable I am. And that was the tipping point. So it's not always just about the exhaustion. And if you're in a supervisory role, you can't expect people to keep working those hours and giving of themselves and not giving them some rewards, not saying thank you for what you do. That's huge. And that's something that doesn't cost money that we can all do.
Absolutely, 100%. And all I can think about are the many, many roles in human services that is in lack, right? And it's not a part of the education and knowledge that's behind introducing and maintaining professionals in this field. Um, and it's also kind of been baked into the stereotype. You think of social workers, and I always use social workers as a good example. The burnout rate and the turnaround rate is way too high for the the metrics that we're trying to meet in service provision. And not only that, we aren't just kind of falling short for those that are seeking those services, but then people are coming out of that work unhealthy, often underpaid, uh, not acknowledged for their work. They have a large work overload. The relationship with the environment is strained, or at best, you can relate to your coworkers and your cohort with the stress and the caseload. I mean, it's astonishing, and I'm really not sure how specifically social work, but in general, a lot of the professionals in human services got to that point. I guess maybe with the cultural shift to achievement and success and meeting metrics, once that became more of a priority, took place of those values of those that you work with and the value of what your staff, provides. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one of the things I worked on with my former organization, I worked on state court reform, and we put together performance measures. So there are metrics, but it's like, okay, we had these different categories of, what does it mean to be a good court? And part of that is respect, how I'm treating people. And like if you look at grant applications, and those metrics, because I've done those over and over, how many people were served? How did you change their lives? How many people went from the shelter to the housing? And it's all numbers driven, and it's not about how we're treating others, and it's not about how we're treating one another. I mean, it's and the workload, this country, the U.S., I, I, teachers, social workers, social services, we treat it as a peripheral, like, oh, okay, well, I mean, we're in the midst of, again, a budget crisis, right? So let's fund the military because we got to keep those weapons fresh and new, but let's attack the teachers and let's attack social services. So that is a really difficult environment in which to work. I mean, I don't watch the news. I can't watch the news. I keep up to date. I can read the news, but you have to decide, you have to have such a strong internal value system because outside you're just being inundated with these negative messages that suggest that your work isn't that meaningful. It's hard.
Yeah, that is such a great point. Not only is the pressure or the lack of affirmation acknowledgement come from within any organization in general, but the way our culture perceives and values social services, it's not a conversation, right? And it might not be a direct conversation within the government that says, okay, we're going to put more money towards military spending, but we're actually going to take that from social services. It's not. like an admission of action, but it just happens. And you can tell when you get your budget for the year and you're like, damn, this is a lot less than last year. And I don't know if this concept applies to all service providers, but there is that metric of you need to meet and or spend what was previously given in order to receive that budget once more. If you're not spending that, you're not going to receive the same budget. You're going to get less. I think that is the dumbest thing
Oh,
because you
yeah. Yeah, and that works throughout the entire system. It works for the military too. Okay, our budget ends September 30th. Why don't you give us this bid for $10,978.16? Because then we'll drain the budget and we make sure we can get that for next year. I mean, for me, it's like as a speaker, it's like, ooh, what's the budget cycle? Because if there's anything left over and they need to spend it, it's like, I can come talk. How much, let's talk about your budget. Because you're right. I mean, it's not about, you've got your budget. You have to show that you need it because if you don't, you're going to get cut the next year. So it's an entirely dysfunctional system. The whole grant-based system, which I've worked on for years. I mean, I've lived off of grants for 20 years. That was my income. But, there were scary times when the economy went down and, housing crisis and budget cuts. And it's like, okay, I have to be ready to shift to get another type of job. And so that's always like in the back of people's minds. It's like, what happens when this grant ends? It's good for a year and a half. Oh, I can extend it to 2 years. Oh, I can extend it. Maybe I can get this. But there's always that level of uncertainty, which is, we get used to living like that. But there's, we have to almost create our own counterculture where within social services, we are our support system. Because outside, and I'm going to just say this, you may or may not agree, but we have always seen that female dominated professions, teachers, social services, social workers, nurses, I mean, those tend to be underpaid, underfunded, and we feel like we can rip them apart maybe because we're still living in this antiquated idea that women's work is just peripheral to what the man does. So I don't know. I really believe we've got this cultural baggage, and so people are constantly living paycheck to paycheck. So when the government shuts down, and it will probably, you know, now we've just delayed it, w- that is one of the scariest moments for many people who are contractors, who are working for the government because they're not going to get a paycheck. And a lot of people cannot live. If they lose one paycheck, they can't do it.
yeah, that's a two steps back, one step forward situation because you're making up for, time lost, income lost. And that takes, you lose a paycheck for the month and then you're spending 3 months trying to recuperate, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 and having to borrow from someone or having to get one of these horrible payday loans, which have a huge interest rates. But the thing is, I mean, I really teach about empowering people because we don't learn anything. That's what we don't talk about money. Money is hush hush. Don't talk about money. How are we going to learn about money if we don't talk about money? And we all have a relationship with money. You cannot live in this world without a relationship with money. What is your relationship like? Are you repelling money? Do you think money is going to do bad things to your life? Are you embracing money? How does money help you create happiness? I mean, one of the things I ask folks to do is write a love letter to money. Dear money, just like you were breaking up with, you wrote a love letter to somebody, you've screwed with me in the past and you really hurt my feelings. And but I still love you. I'm going to take care of you. So we all have a relationship with money.
Right. And that relationship, how do how do our beliefs about money play into our relationship with it?
It's interesting because I created 4 different money personalities, and so
Yeah, I
actually
took the quiz.
I have a quiz, right? So it's
Mhm.
at, on my website, drbrendamoneycoach.com. And so there are 4 different personalities. One is the voyager. This is the take charge person. I can do it, but they're oftentimes set at the destination and not enjoying the waterfalls on the way. I have the scout, and that is where most of my nurses and human services, social workers fit into the scout, because the scout is looking ahead. Their job is to make sure that things are safe for the people behind them. So scouts tend to put their own needs at the end of the line. I've got a third personality, which is the wanderer, and this is your creative type, you know. Oh, I love doing this, and I don't really care if I get paid for it, but I just want to do my art and do my stuff, and money's going to maybe corrupt my art. So that's the wanderer. And then I have the globetrotter, and the globetrotter loves all the jazzy, glitzy stuff. You know, they don't really want to be responsible for money in the first place. They might be chasing after somebody who has the money so they can just have it without the work. So I have these 4 personalities, and they all sort of correspond to the limitations and the baggage that we bring. But definitely for women, and for women who are in more social services, the helping, and men and women, everybody who are into the helping professions often tend to be scouts. And so, like, people say, well, what should I do first? Should I help my kid get through college, or should I save for my retirement? You always save for yourself first. Your kid's got a lot more years ahead than you do. And your kid's probably not going to want to take care of you when you're living off of Social Security. Take care of yourself first. So that's really a challenge. Once you recognize that and you say, you know, I can't keep giving my money away. I can't keep doing this for everybody else. What brings me happiness? What brings me joy? Maybe I deserve something too. It's not all about giving.
I think when in our culture, especially human service professionals, I might be making too big of a generalization, but as givers, um, I imagine that when we ponder on what makes us happy, it's very there's like a there's like a I don't want to spend money on that because that's not a priority, right? You know, you think about the things you want to do, but there's kind of a disconnect between the things that you want to do that you enjoy doing and what it brings to your well-being. And then when money's involved, many people just pass over those things because maybe they have an idea that I don't have enough money or time to fund these activities that I really enjoy. And I've definitely been in that situation before where, on a list of priorities, it didn't make sense, right, to schedule time or spend a certain amount of money to do something that was for me and me alone. And I imagine a lot of human service professionals also experience some, degree of that. Have you seen that belief or that perception around money and well-being with those that you've worked with?
Well, here's the thing. You use the word priorities, and that's what it all comes down to. What are your priorities? Because most people haven't listed their priorities. When you really start to list your priorities down, and then you match your money with it, that's the way you want to live. So maybe my priorities, like, I've got 2 cats who are totally, they raced around all morning. They're like in a coma right now. So I got 2 sleepy cats. So maybe my priority might be donating some time or money at the animal shelter, at the local animal shelter where I got these guys from. Everybody has different priorities, but if that is one of your priorities, then see how it fits into the bigger picture. Um, it's so, like, I ask people to go through wants versus needs activity take all your expenses, everything you paid for in the last month, and most of us use credit, debit cards, the record's there. Where did you spend it? Was it a want or a need? And when you start going through that, you realize how much money is spent on things that you don't even care about. So for me, it's dining out. I don't like to spend my money dining out. It's expensive, and usually I can make better food at home. But I know that's a big activity. So what I would do is, and this is going to sound extreme to some people who are listening, but I'd be like, okay, I'm going to take $100 out in cash every month, and that's my dining out budget. And it actually works for me. And I don't dine out generally for myself. I tend to do it because somebody else wants to dine out, or maybe I want to treat myself. But when I know that it's low on my priority, but I don't want to exclude it because most people think of budgets as deprivation. It's all about priorities. It's about rewarding yourself. When I take myself out to eat or go get an ice cream treat or whatever it is, that's my weakness. I've got the cash. I know it's allocated for that, and it's okay to spend it. And so my priority is experiences, and that's travel, meeting people. I learned I was miserable sitting at my dining room table working. I'm like, I've got to make a big change in my life. I had to say, what are my priorities? And the thing is, stuff is not my priority. I don't want to accumulate stuff. I want to accumulate experiences. I want to accumulate memories. And so now, like when I'm on Facebook and something pops up, like 2 years ago, I was at Angel's Landing and the video came up and I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. That's what my life is about. I want my Facebook feed to be filled with the stuff that brings me happiness. That's my priority. But it is very personal. It's not everybody's priority.
Special thanks to our guest, Dr. Brenda. Don't miss part 2 of our conversation premiering Tuesday, April 23rd.